A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Hello there, Herman and Corin. I hope everything is well today on your GPU provided by Modal. I know I've used that joke before and it's not a particularly funny one, but Herman and Corin are AI-generated voices who live on an ephemeral job that runs on a GPU. Sorry, Herman and Corin, I busted the narrative or the fiction of this podcast. You are not sentient beings. You are merely Gemini 3.1 being read out by Chatterbox based on my weird voice clones. You thought my prompts were weird. The voice clone samples are much weirder. I did your voices a few months ago. The samples got cached, and now they're used to generate episodes. But this podcast is produced with the generous GPU compute credits provided to us by Modal. Modal.com, serverless GPU, lest I get them in trouble because we do take some rather staunch stands in our episodes or cover controversial topics. Their generous provision of GPU credits does not mean that they endorse any or all of the episodes, but they did like the concept enough to help us out in that respect. And I have to say it's extremely appreciated because not only did it take me a long time to find a pipeline that worked, to find one that was actually cost effective was really hard. And that is where I encourage those who are building with AI tools to look at serverless GPU because there's a million and one APIs and API aggregators out there, and they often are kind of black boxes in terms of how they actually use the models. Are they legitimate? There's something very technically pleasant about being handed a blank slate. Like, write a Python script, put it on the GPU, it will run, you know exactly what's happening, you can see the logs, but you're getting to use an A100 GPU that you would probably have to sell your house and your kidneys to, and then some, in order to be able to actually afford. So it's a super service, and I was recommending them widely, even before they generously helped us out with this GPU credits. So I continue to do so, and thank you very much, Modal. It's genuinely much appreciated because this is providing me with a lot of fun, a lot of learning, and I hope creating a really interesting experiment for those interested in AI. And I hope it's changing some people's minds about AI can actually be a learning resource, because that's ultimately what we're doing here. I've invested a lot of time and effort in grounding. It doesn't mean the pipeline is infallible. We do occasionally have errors, and we do pull episodes when they occur. But the batting average, I would say, especially with the grounding and 3.1, is, I would argue, higher than many podcasts that are entirely produced by humans who couldn't research in the time that the AI models do in this thing. So I feel much more informed, and I've learned a huge amount of information that has really helped in my own day-to-day life work from this podcast. So I hope everyone else is continuing to enjoy the show. So let's talk about another one relative to sleep, Herman and Corin, which we mentioned that we might try to coerce a family member to review some of these prompts so we can say we're AI plus human reviewed. We talked about sleep architecture in a previous episode, and how that changes over time and what it does. And we've often likened the sleep process to a cleanup team that comes in. I think it was that episode where I asked you a simple question I've always wondered. Doesn't matter when you sleep. We talk about the 8 hours and you have to get your 8 hours of sleep, but doesn't matter if you're a night shift worker getting it from 4 a.m. to midday. And I always assumed it was one of those things that my mother was saying, hey, it doesn't count, it's not the same thing, it's an old wives' tale. But it's not. And that was a super interesting episode because we talked about how the circadian rhythm, the flow in which the universe works, the sun comes up and down at certain hours, has a little repetition in our bodies, and that is actually kind of such a beautiful concept. I am religious. I believe in God, and there's little things like this that make me increase my faith. I say, what a beautiful architecture, that the meta architecture is mirrored in the tiny glands in our body. It's a beautiful system. But that system, us humans can tamper with the intended workflow of that system and really live against nature. And when we talk about sleep architecture and this cleanup process, I'm sure it's way more complicated than that word does justice to, but it's very much associated with preventing, as I understand it, dementia. And when we hear about dementia, we often hear about amyloid plaques that form in the brain and aggregate over time. And what I'd love to talk about in this episode, which I hope will be of a lot of interest to my father-in-law, who is really the expert here, and maybe he can suggest some deep dives that we can sort of go deeper, and he can maybe review those. But let's just cover the foundations of this topic first. And I'm going to start with the kind of really basic stuff. We know that there's different forms of dementia. There's what we often just hear of as Alzheimer's, vascular forms of dementia, and some really tragic cases of early onset dementia. And from what I've read in the news snippets I've read now and again, these can have quite different pathologies. They might have the same result, but the mechanism that creates them is different. And when we talk about sleep architecture, this process of cleaning up these plaques that form every day, as it were, is it a complete cleanup, a partial cleanup? But let's actually move away from that grim, because this is such a sad and tragic topic that I'd hate to spend time talking about the questions we probably don't want to answer. And I'd rather talk about what it can actually do when it works well, the system. Why is it so important that we get sleep, that we let the natural cleanup process that we'll talk about work? And regarding the different types, is it associated with all or just one form of dementia? And we can talk a little bit about the differences between those, because it is something that affects a huge amount of people around the world, and we all need to sleep, I think. Maybe that's another episode. Herman and Corinne talk about the brain's cleanup process and associated topics in today's My Word Prompts.
You ever have those mornings where you wake up and your head feels like a dusty attic that hasn't seen a vacuum in 3 decades? You're groggy, your thoughts are moving through molasses, and you're pretty sure you've forgotten how to do basic long division. Well, it turns out that feeling might be more literal than we thought. Today's prompt from Daniel is about the brain's natural cleanup process during sleep, and how it's basically the only thing standing between us and a very messy future with dementia.
It is a phenomenal topic because for the longest time, we just didn't understand the plumbing. Herman Popplebear here, and I have been diving into some of the papers Daniel pointed us toward, especially the landmark human evidence that just came out in January of 2026. We used to think the brain was this pristine, isolated fortress, but it turns out it has a nightly deep clean cycle that is as mechanical and messy as a power wash for your driveway.
I like the power wash imagery, though I suspect my brain is more like a gentle misting at best. Daniel's asking about why we need sleep for this, and whether this cleanup failure is the common denominator for all types of dementia, like Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. So, let's start with the basics. We have a lymphatic system for the rest of our body to get rid of waste. Why didn't the brain just get an invite to that party?
The brain is extremely picky about who it lets in and out. We have the blood-brain barrier, which is great for keeping toxins and pathogens out, but it also means the traditional lymphatic vessels that drain waste from your toes or your liver can't get inside the skull. For over a century, scientists were actually baffled. They knew the brain was metabolically expensive. It's about 2% of your body weight, but uses 20% of your energy, which means it produces a mountain of metabolic trash. But they couldn't find the trash cans.
So the brain is basically a high-end restaurant with no dumpster out back? That sounds like a health code violation.
It really was a mystery until Dr. Maken Nedergaard, that is spelled Maikennedergaard, coined the term glymphatic system in 2012. She combined the word glial for the specialized brain cells involved and lymphatic. And the reason we missed it for so long is that you can't see it in dead tissue. When the brain stops pumping, the system collapses. You have to see it in a living, breathing, and most importantly, sleeping brain to understand how it works.
And that brings us to the first part of Daniel's prompt. Why sleep? I mean, I'm a sloth, Herman. I'm professionally qualified to talk about sleep, or at least the lack of movement. But why can't the brain just run the dishwasher while we're awake and checking our emails?
This is the wild part. It's an issue of space and energy. When we're awake, our brain cells are packed tightly together and they're firing constantly. There's almost no room for fluid to move between them. But the moment you hit deep, non-rapid eye movement sleep, specifically stage 3 sleep, a literal sleep switch flips. The interstitial space, which is the gap between your neurons, expands by up to 60%.
60%? That's not a minor adjustment. That's like my living room suddenly becoming the size of a ballroom.
It is massive. This expansion significantly reduces the resistance to fluid flow. Think of it like a crowded subway station during rush hour. You can't get a cleaning crew in there when people are packed shoulder to shoulder. But once everyone leaves and the station clears out, you can bring in the floor scrubbers. During sleep, the cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF, can finally rush into the brain parenchyma, that is PARENCHYMA, and flush out the metabolic byproducts that have been building up all day.
So if I'm pulling an all-nighter or just getting 4 hours of sleep, I'm basically leaving the subway station crowded, and the cleaning crew is just sitting in the break room getting paid for nothing?
Even worse, the trash just keeps piling up on the tracks. The primary gatekeepers for this fluid flow are these tiny water channels called aquaporin 4, or AQP4. They're located on the end feet of astrocytes, which are star-shaped glial cells. These channels allow the cerebrospinal fluid to move from the perivascular spaces into the brain tissue itself. If you don't get that expansion of the interstitial space during deep sleep, the fluid can't get in, the aquaporin 4 channels can't do their job, and the waste stays put.
Okay, so we've got the cleaning crew and the open floor plan. But what's the pump? You mentioned earlier that the traditional lymphatic system doesn't reach the brain. If the heart is pumping blood, is it also pumping this brainwash fluid?
You hit the nail on the head. The pump is actually your cardiovascular system. Specifically, its arterial pulsatility. As your heart beats, your arteries expand and contract. Because the brain is encased in a rigid skull, that pulsing of the artery walls actually massages the cerebrospinal fluid through those perivascular spaces. It's a mechanical pump. This is why vascular health is so intertwined with brain health. If your arteries are stiff from high blood pressure or age, they don't pulse as effectively, which means the pump for your brain's waste clearance is failing.
That's a scary thought. It means heart health isn't just about avoiding a heart attack. It's about keeping the brain vacuum plugged in. I want to dig into the dementia side of this, because that's where the stakes get really high. Daniel specifically mentioned Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. Are we talking about the same failure in both cases, or does the brainwash fail in different ways?
They're different symptoms of a similar underlying plumbing failure. In Alzheimer's, the primary trash we're worried about is amyloid-beta and tau proteins. These are metabolic byproducts that everyone produces. But in a healthy brain, the glymphatic system flushes them out every night. When that system fails, these proteins start to clump together. Amyloid beta forms plaques outside the cells, and tau forms tangles inside them. A study from the University of Washington and Applied Cognition that just came out in January of 2026 provided the first causal evidence in humans that sleep-active glymphatic transport is what actually clears these specific proteins.
Causal evidence. So it's not just a correlation where people with Alzheimer's happen to sleep poorly. It's that the poor sleep is actually preventing the clearance, which then causes the buildup.
That is the shift in the research. We used to think sleep disturbance was just a symptom of dementia. Now we're realizing it might be a primary driver. If you can't clear the amyloid, it builds up. The more it builds up, the more it disrupts your sleep architecture, which further impairs clearance. It's a devastating feedback loop.
And what about vascular dementia? That one feels like it's even more directly tied to the pump problem you mentioned.
It is. Vascular dementia is often linked to what we call cerebral small vessel disease. If the tiny vessels in your brain are damaged or hardened, they can't provide the pulsatility needed to drive the glymphatic flow. In the clogged drain model of Alzheimer's, you have too much trash. In the leaky pipe or broken pump model of vascular dementia, the infrastructure itself is failing. A March 2026 report in The Scientist pointed out that people with non-dipping blood pressure, meaning their blood pressure doesn't drop naturally while they sleep, have much stiffer vessels. That stiffness reduces the pumping efficiency of the glymphatic system, leading to a buildup of waste even if they don't have the specific genetic markers for Alzheimer's.
So it's like the difference between a house where people just keep throwing trash on the floor versus a house where the plumbing has literally burst and the water can't get to the sink. Either way, you've got a mess, but the cause is different.
That is a great way to look at it, and it's not just limited to those two. Emerging research from February of 2026 suggests the glymphatic system is also responsible for clearing alpha-synuclein, which is the protein associated with Parkinson's, and even mutant huntingtin proteins in Huntington's disease. It's becoming clear that the glymphatic system is the final common pathway for almost all neurodegenerative diseases. If the brain can't clean itself, bad things happen, regardless of which specific protein is building up.
It makes me think about how we treat these things. Historically, we've spent billions trying to find drugs that break up amyloid plaques. But if the drain is still clogged, aren't we just breaking up the trash and leaving it on the floor?
That has been the massive frustration in neurology for decades. We've had drugs that successfully cleared amyloid from the brain, but the patients didn't always get better. One reason might be that we were clearing the trash but not fixing the disposal system. This is why there's so much excitement right now about pharmacological modulators like ACX02. This is a drug currently in clinical trials, and early data from March 11th of 2026 showed it might actually increase brain-to-blood protein clearance by reducing the resistance in the brain tissue itself. Instead of just targeting one protein, you're trying to grease the pipes for everything.
I love the idea of greasing the pipes. It's a much more holistic approach. But until we have a brainwash pill, we're stuck with the old-fashioned way, actually sleeping. Daniel asked why adequate sleep is essential. We've talked about the 60% expansion in deep sleep, but is it just about the total hours, or is the quality of those hours what matters?
It's heavily weighted toward the quality and the timing. We actually touched on this in episode 1588 when we talked about sleep architecture. You need to get into that deep, slow-wave N3 sleep for the glymphatic system to hit peak efficiency. This is why things like alcohol or certain sleep medications can be so deceptive. You might be unconscious for 8 hours, but if those drugs are suppressing your deep sleep stages, your brain isn't actually getting cleaned.
We talked about that in episode 540, too, with the whole sedation versus sleep thing. It's like being knocked out with a mallet versus actually resting. The mallet doesn't trigger the 60% interstitial expansion, does it?
It does not. In fact, some sedatives might actually impair the aquaporin 4 channels. Natural sleep involves a very specific rhythmic oscillation of blood flow and cerebrospinal fluid. When you're in deep sleep, your neurons fire in these big, slow, synchronized waves. When they all go quiet at the same time, they use less blood, so blood leaves the brain. That creates space for a massive wave of cerebrospinal fluid to rush in. It's a coordinated dance. If you disrupt that rhythm with chemicals or by waking up every 2 hours, you're interrupting the wash cycle mid-rinse.
I'm imagining a dishwasher that stops every 5 minutes and makes you restart it. Your plates are never going to be clean. You also mentioned brain age earlier. I saw a study from just a few days ago, March 19th, about how machine learning is being used on sleep data to predict dementia risk. What's the connection there?
That was in JAMA Network Open. Researchers used machine learning to analyze sleep, EEG patterns, and calculate a brain age. They found that for every 10-year increase in your brain age over your actual chronological age, your risk of dementia rises by nearly 40%. And the biggest factor in an older brain age? Poor glymphatic efficiency during sleep. Your sleep patterns are a direct window into how well your brain is maintaining its physical infrastructure.
That's a sobering statistic. It's not just, I'm tired today. It's, I'm aging my brain by a decade because I won't stop scrolling through animal videos at 2 in the morning. Speaking of which, I'm feeling personally attacked by this entire conversation. Let's move into some takeaways because I think people, including myself, need to know how to actually protect this system. If we can't get the ACX02 drug yet, what can we do?
The first and most obvious one is prioritizing sleep architecture. We need to stop treating sleep as a luxury and start treating it as a biological necessity for waste management. This means consistency. Going to bed and waking up at the same time helps your brain enter those deep sleep stages more reliably.
And what about the pump part? You said cardiovascular health is the driver.
It's huge. Anything that improves arterial health and reduces stiffness is going to help your glymphatic system. Exercise isn't just for your heart or your waistline, it's keeping your brain pipes flexible. There's also some fascinating research on sleep position. While it's still mostly in animal models, some studies suggest that sleeping on your side, the lateral position, might be more efficient for glymphatic clearance than sleeping on your back or stomach.
Side sleepers for the win. I knew there was a reason I liked curling up. What about blood pressure? You mentioned the non-dippers who have issues because their pressure doesn't drop at night.
Managing blood pressure is probably the single most important thing you can do for your vascular health and, by extension, your glymphatic health. If you have chronic hypertension, those perivascular spaces are under constant strain and the arterial walls stiffen up. That kills the massage effect that moves the fluid. If you can keep your blood pressure in a healthy range, you're giving your brain's cleaning crew a much better chance of success.
I also saw something in Daniel's notes about the DTIALPS index. That sounds like a secret government agency. What is that?
It stands for Diffusion Tensor Image Analysis, along the perivascular space. It's a non-invasive MRI technique that doctors are starting to use to actually measure glymphatic function in living patients. This is a game changer because, for the first time, we can see if someone's pipes are working before they start showing symptoms of memory loss. It's moving us from a world of reactive medicine where we wait for the brain to fail to a world of proactive maintenance.
So, in the future, your annual checkup might include a brain plumbing report. Everything looks good, Corn, but your aquaporin 4 channels are looking a little sluggish. Maybe cut back on the late-night espresso.
That is exactly where we're headed. The World Sleep Society actually just had their World Sleep Day earlier this month, and their whole campaign was about elevating sleep to a pillar of health, equal to diet and exercise. These findings about the glymphatic system are the scientific backbone of that movement. We're finally understanding the why behind the what.
It's fascinating how much of this comes down to basic mechanics. We talk about the brain as this mystical organ of consciousness, but at the end of the day, it's also a physical object that needs to be washed. If you don't wash your socks, they get gross. If you don't wash your brain, it gets dementia. It's a bit of a crude summary, but I think it lands.
It's accurate. The brain is the most metabolically active organ we have, and we've been ignoring its waste management system for a century. Whether it's the amyloid-beta buildup in Alzheimer's or the vascular failure in small vessel disease, the common denominator is a failure of the wash cycle.
Well, I'm certainly going to be thinking about my interstitial expansion next time I'm tempted to stay up late. This was a deep one, Herman. I feel like I need a nap just to process all the talk about sleep.
Just make sure it's a deep one. No mallets allowed.
Noted. No mallets. We should probably wrap this up before I actually fall asleep on the microphone. This has been a great look into a field that's moving incredibly fast. I mean, we're citing papers from 2 weeks ago. It's an exciting time for neurology.
It really is. The shift from let's try to fix a broken brain to let's keep the brain from breaking by maintaining its natural cleanup system is the most hopeful direction I've seen in years.
On that high note, thanks to Daniel for the prompt. It's always a good day when we get to nerd out over brain plumbing. Big thanks to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the show running smoothly.
And thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power our generation pipeline. We couldn't do this without them.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you want to dive into our archive, check out myweirdprompts.com. You can find all 1,500 plus episodes there, including the ones we mentioned today about sleep architecture and sedation.
You can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your audio fix.
And if you're on Telegram, search for My Weird Prompts to get notified whenever a new episode drops. We'll be back soon with more of Daniel's Weird Prompts. Until then, get some sleep. Your brain will thank you.
Good night, Corn.
Good night, Herman. Keep those pipes clean.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth from man.
keep weird in my